Well, the good news on Capitol Hill is that support for Israel is strong and it's bipartisan. And it's very important that we keep it that way. And that's why I think it's so important that people who support Israel, both in the Congress and out of the Congress, speak loudly and clearly, come to Washington to show support. Israel faces many challenges, more so now than ever before. And the United States has proven time and time again that it's really Israel's only true friend. Presidents come and presidents go, and prime ministers come and prime ministers go, and members of the Knesset come and go, and members of Congress come and go, although I don't want to go so fast. But the U.S.-Israel relationship has to remain strong. And that's why we have organizations like AIPAC, other organizations that get together in Washington to show strong U.S. support for Israel. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel and the United States share common values. And I believe it's very, very important that the United States continues to stand by Israel in its time of need. The question for me is not whether an administration will be pro-Israel. Most administrations will be pro-Israel. The question is when international pressure is put on Israel. The United States needs to stand by Israel strongly, because if the United States does not do that, and no other nation on earth will. So we are all working together to make sure that the U.S.-Israel relationship remains strong. The worst thing that can be said to Jewish people or to Israelis is when people use the term Holocaust to describe what is going on in Gaza or in the Palestinian territories. As far as I'm concerned, there's only one Holocaust, unfortunately, and that was the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews died at the hand of the Nazis during World War II. And to use that term lightly, to accuse Jews of perpetuating a Holocaust against another people is so obscene and so outrageous that it almost doesn't even warrant any kind of response. Israel went into Gaza to protect its citizens. No other country in the world would have allowed 8,000 rockets time in and time again hitting its towns, hurting its people, hitting places like Sderot. If the United States had a terrorist group over the border in Canada or Mexico firing on the United States day in and day out, would we just sit still and allow it? Of course not. We would send troops over the border. That's what Israel did with Gaza. And rather than be condemned for it, Israel should be thanked for taking great pains to avoid civilian casualties. If Hamas puts its bomb factories and puts its missiles and weapons in the midst of populated areas, and if Israel fires back to get at those weapons and missiles, and civilians are killed, Israel's not to blame. It's Hamas that's to blame, because they use their own people as human shields. And so this really needs to stop, and the world really needs to take notice of what's really going on in the Middle East. And finally, I want to just say this. Israel will continue to do everything to protect its citizens, as any country, any government would do for any country. And the United States will always stand by Israel because, again, there's common values, common democracy, and common thinking. And so that's why Israel and the United States are such good friends, and why the U.S.-Israel relationship will remain strong.
Are the enemies of Israel the enemies of America?
Of course. I mean, it's funny. People think that Iran, that lunatic Ahmadinejad talks about wiping Israel off the face of the map. The truth is, if he had his way, he'd wipe the United States off the face of the map, and probably 2/3 of Europe. And I always tell my European friends that Iran is not only a threat to Israel, it's a grave threat to Europe as well, and much more of a threat to Europe than it is to the United States. So it's amazing to me that some of these countries just turn a blind eye to what's going on in Iran. Iran must not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. That will change the entire balance of power in the area, in the region. And I don't believe Iran, and neither does any smart thinking person or country when Iran says it's building up nuclear power for peaceful reasons. Iran is the largest supporter of terrorism across the world, and not just supporter, financing terrorism. And if it were to have nuclear weapons, it would be a game changer, and we cannot allow that.
Do you think the U.S., the new Obama administration, okay, it's past 100 days, so it technically isn't new anymore. Do you think the Obama administration has Israel's best interest at heart vis-a-vis the threat from Iran?
Yes, I think that President Obama understands the threat from Iran. I think his approach is different. He feels that the other approach has failed, and so he wants to try an approach of engagement with Iran. I hope it works. I have my doubts, but I think the president is right to try it. I have no doubt that Barack Obama is a friend of Israel. I have no doubt the fact that he lived in Chicago and was a senator there, came into interaction with the Jewish community in Chicago, which is large and strong. And I believe that Obama has Israel's best interests at heart. And I believe his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, does as well. So if he wants to try a new approach, let him try it. I hope it works. But if it doesn't, I expect President Obama to stand by Israel through thick and thin.
And by that thick and thin, if Israel were to, let's say, carry out a ballistic missile attack against Iran's nuclear weaponization programs, and then there's the chess game that plays out against American troops in Iraq, against Saudi oil interests, and so the world becomes a tougher place to stand behind Israel, support Israel, both from a military perspective and from a political perspective. What then?
Well, it's hypothetical, so it's hard for me to comment on it. But I think that Israel, like any other country, will do what it feels it needs to do to protect its existence. And at some point, if a tough decision has to be made, we hope it doesn't come to that. But I think there are people in the United States who will understand that if the very threat of the existence of the Jewish state is there, then Israel has to operate within its best interest. The interesting thing is, Israel gets condemned for whatever it does in the UN, whether it does something that the UN thinks is wrong or the UN thinks is right. So I think Israel need not worry about world public opinion. Israel needs to do what it thinks is best. And I'm sure whatever Israel will do, the United States will be informed. I don't think the United States will be blindsided, but we hope it won't come to that. We hope that Iran will back down. Now, Iran will only back down if it understands that the world will not turn a blind eye to what it's doing. Right now, the world has shown that it lacks a backbone. I hope that'll change, and I know President Obama is going to do everything possible to make that change. I think he's going to want to involve other countries in making sure that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. I think he's going to tell Iran that Iran has a historic opportunity right now to change the perception and change the way the world treats it. I think he's going to use the carrot and stick philosophy. And if Iran abandons its nuclear weapons, I think that there will be some carrots there. And if it doesn't, I think there'll be sticks. And I think this administration will do the right thing. And I have confidence in President Obama.
Are there points that you addressed in your presentation here today that you might want to make for the viewing audience?
Well, only that I think it's important that those of us who support a strong Israel and a strong U.S.-Israel relationship show our faces and be strong about it. I can tell you, being in Congress 20 years plus, that when activists come to Washington, Congress members and senators take notice So I think it's very important, and I think it's important not only for Jewish activists but for Christian activists who feel strong support for Israel and understands that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. And I think another thing that we ought to say, Israel's a Jewish state, and it should remain a Jewish state. And anybody who thinks it shouldn't or wants to play games with it should really not be counted as a serious player. There needs to be two states side by side in peace and security, and that's a Palestinian Arab state and an Israeli Jewish state, period. And that's the way it has to be.
Well, some would consider Jordan to be a Palestinian Arab state.
Well, I won't get into that. Some would. The bottom line is Israel needs peace and security, and with defined borders, whatever those borders are, I leave that to the Israelis to negotiate. But it is what it is. Reality is reality, and right now we have to protect the Jewish state, and whatever the Palestinian state is, it'll be negotiated.
And when we call it the Jewish state, what is meant by the notion of a Jew? Is it a state only for Jewish people?
No, we know that 1/5 of Israel right now is not Jewish, is Palestinian, and that's the way it is. But what we do mean is that whenever there's a peace deal, if there is a peace deal, and we hope there is, with the Palestinians, that the Palestinians don't have a right of return to two states. They have a right of return to the Palestinian state, not to the Israeli state, which is a Jewish state. And if their grandparents were misplaced or displaced, mostly by themselves, because Israel is a fifth Arab. The ones that stayed were made citizens of the state, and the ones that left on their own volition. So, they left. If their descendants want to have some kind of reparations, or the right of return, they can go back to the Palestinian state, not to the Israeli state, even if some of the towns they had lived in are now part of what is Israel proper. It's a very thorny discussion, and it will be negotiated, obviously, but they will not have the right of return to two states. And that's what I mean when I say that Israel is a Jewish state. No right of return for Palestinians to Israel. They can return to the Palestinian state, and there can be compensation given or whatever. I leave that to be worked out between Israel and the Palestinians.